Every built thing, every constructed item carries with it some implicit representation or claim about how long it should exist or how long it may exist. A skyscraper represents a significant investment. It therefore has a reasonable cause for continuing to exist for a long period of time, at least the chance would be. A video that you would post on Instagram, less so, although that diverges into a somewhat different topic because the data most likely will continue to exist in some form, but the lifetime of the video for surfacing to people is probably smaller. And a mug that you made in shop probably lies somewhere in between. Among all these things fall the various forms of human creation. Often the lifespan that's given to or expected of a particular item, physical or digital, reflects a kind of compendium of practical considerations. Who's running the show, how long they expect the thing that they brought into creation to last, how it's being funded against the cost of making it, and other concerns. We want to build things to last, often just because rebuilding them isn't beneficial. Sometimes we build things because we like them, but often cost and expense is really what drives permanence. Sometimes we do create because we're inspired. More often we create because we perceive a need for something to be created. And most often we create because we'll be compensated for creating, or alternatively rebuked if we fail to create it. And modern culture generally runs on this cycle of creation, and mostly to good effect. That cycle renders impermanent everything from a simple text document up to a skyscraper. Reasonably, we prefer not to think of the things we create as impermanent, at least most of the time. And it's easier to do that for something like a skyscraper, which very well might outlast our lifetime, as compared to a text document you create for a report at work, which again, even if the data still exists, won't be viewed for very long after that report is delivered. But no matter what it is we make, it's nice to imagine that it will at least be available for a while, that it will have a purpose and serve a purpose. But we know when we create certain types of things, like that text document, but many others as well, that it's not very likely to be used more than once. Some things are not meant to be used more than once. But even for that, some part of us often likes to imagine that it has some degree of permanence, even just in terms of impact. It's there to be found and used and reused, even if it's in the backlog, or at the very least it has some minor cultural impact. Is that the best way to think? To expect or wish for some kind of permanent impact? It is sometimes, but the desire for that permanence can counterintuitively stand in the way of progress, even just personal progress. The constructed artifact itself can start to matter or feel like it matters more than the purpose that it serves. That happens individually and it happens organizationally. And software lands in a peculiar spot in all of this. Software often looks permanent. We often treat it as long-lived. Most software is versioned, documented, secured, maintained. But all of that also requires, usually, a certain kind of continuing attention. Like much infrastructure, if it doesn't get attention, it will start to break down, all the more so because there are so many dependencies in most software. We have a reason to sustain it, to take those actions, because often the software is either making our lives easier or making other people's lives easier or bringing in money from paying users. Many companies rely on software and the stability of that software, either software that they use themselves, like accounting software or project planning, email, anything else, or the applications that they make and sell as products and services. And changing over to a new application, a new piece of software, is often a long and slow process, and users understandably don't like to have to jump from one system to another, one interface to a new interface, especially when they're well entrenched into a given system. And even though there is overhead in maintenance, it's still easier to maintain than it is to replace, all things considered. At least it has been. That's one thing that's changing. Maintenance, however tedious, has generally been something that's easy to repeat, whereas coding something from scratch is often a lot harder. The idea might be simple for an application, but the effort and time to create that, to turn the logic into reality, deal with edge cases, solve the problem in practice, that's complex. And in the past, it was guaranteed to require a lot of brain power and a lot of time. But we're getting to the point, of course, when a functioning tool, a working piece of software, can be effectively conjured into existence in moments, depending on the power of the AI and the application being created. And so the end result is a little less important. Building something once, only requires applying a certain number of tokens. Maintaining it will often require a lot more effort, human effort, usually, whereas the effort to create it may require very little human effort at all. And so the piece of software, the code, becomes more of a byproduct, the byproduct of an idea. And the idea may then have a longer lifespan than the software, which has already been the case. You take something like a protocol like email, which has been in place for many decades already, and it's gone through a number of iterations. That's just one of many examples. A particular piece of software used may fall by the wayside and get replaced, but the idea of it lives on. But now that replacement process is sped up. The release of software can often be expedited. So what takes the focus as the important outcome? Is longevity of a piece of software still something to strive for? Yes and no. The benefits are plain enough to see. As we said before, switching from one interface to another, one system to another, it's a pain for end users who are used to it, organizationally for those who have to support it architecturally and systematically. It requires mental overhead to change and process overhead to change. Sometimes the process itself that was in place then needs to be reinvented entirely, at which point other systems that are built on top of the assumptions of that system also cascade effects, and the ramifications can be relatively significant, relatively costly, even relatively damaging. The law of unintended consequences plays its hand there. Keeping something permanent is not only practical for those reasons, but it also then gives that additional bit of brand dependability, a sense of stability, a sense of continuity, and that's something that humans often thrive on. On the other hand, we do end up running a lot of financial and technical debts trying to sustain old systems. Processes that are entrenched often sag under the burden of accumulated dead weight in the process. When you can get rid of dependencies, when you can get rid of stale and old code that's taking effort to maintain, when you can get rid of outdated processes simply by replacing them with a new system. And because you can turn over the system with a new piece of software as quickly as you want, and that eliminates a lot of organizational struggle to make the change, or a lot of individual struggle to make the change. It clears away roadblocks when the idea almost takes supremacy by itself. The software is more of an outcome, a flexible outcome. There are downsides as well to that outcome, the product itself, from potentially messy code to code that nobody in the organization fully understands because they haven't had a reason to look at it, or it iterates so fast that they can't keep up with it. Maybe that's just the way of the future. But it definitely contains some potential problems, especially if you can't be entirely certain about the stability of the code in total, and you never know when a user will stumble onto some ticking time bomb. Organizational knowledge becomes transient as well as the system. The faster that new systems are released, the less anyone in the organization can claim to know how things work, and that becomes a problem as well. The fluidity and flexibility that are created when software is more transient have a lot of upsides, but they present a lot of problems as well. And the more broad and the more deeply entrenched that a process or an organization or a system is, the more problematic this kind of iterative releasing and transient software can become. But it may be that transient software is the future and that these are just growing pains. It seems most likely, or maybe just most immediate, that it will be the future for an individual on a person-to-person case rather than a company-to-company case. You can already see this happening a lot in hobbyist communities. People are constantly now turning out new tools, new utilities, interfaces, games, all accelerated by AI-assisted coding or simply vibe coding, and made their personal dream a reality. I've done it myself. It's 10% you, 90% or more the AI, just giving it the guidance it needs, resulting in some little tool or app that helps you manage your emails, set your calendar appointments, mod a game that you have, whatever else. And that's the point. Those whatever they are, whatever else is, are highly individualized. And we can create and resolve within these nuanced niches where you would never be able to find a piece of software that perfectly fits your needs, and you're not going to dump $1,000 or $10,000 that it would take to build or hire someone to build this thing from scratch. But if AI can do that in a fraction of the time at a tiny fraction of the cost often, then that's a huge win. And because your system is individualized, or at most family level or community level, the cost and the overhead are very low. It's easy to swap out, it's easy to change around, to adapt, and the gains far outweigh any downsides for the most part. This is where that kind of transience has a big win. If you need a piece of software to do something personally, to manage your 3D printer to change how your automatic coffee maker works because you don't like the system that came with it, to sync files across computers in a way that none of the existing solutions quite do, or any of a million other things. You can do it almost in an instant. And that's the idea. The idea of being able to resolve some problem that you have in a way that's unique to you or to your family or to your community, when you would never have the ability to make those modifications on your own or the time to make those modifications on your own, but now you can. That's what matters. The interaction with the problems you're trying to solve becomes more like a conversation, ongoing, that adapts and changes with the day-to-day needs of each of us. And the code almost becomes something to ignore when the development of it via AI becomes stabilized. The dangers on a personal level are relatively low, as long as you use a little bit of common sense, because again, it's only your processes that can go down, and then you can just iterate on it one more time. You haven't lost much, again, assuming you have basic safeguards for your data and things like that. Those problems are perpetual, but many good coding models now take that into account by default and put security practices in place. The chance of significant downsides is extremely low, and you don't have the kind of entrenched user base that many software systems do, because it's just you and a handful of friends using something for fun, or that makes your life a little bit easier. And it is a different set of circumstances than for large organizations, large systems, which is not to say that transience won't apply to that either, and we do already see that happening. It's going to be, no doubt, a bit of a roller coaster ride to see how that acceleration of software change fits in with these very deep, very entrenched organizational systems. A little bit of caution is definitely worth having and worth applying, but a focus on the overall outcome and the sustaining of the idea of the goal over sustaining the artifact itself is also important. And it's likely that we will see an upsurge in this, especially as the speed of development and the stability and rigidity of these existing systems find a way to interrelate with one another smoothly. As complex processes find a way to utilize and be utilized by the more iterative, ephemeral software development process that's enabled by automation. Permanence itself isn't going away. Integrity isn't going away, but it may take a new form, and that's all to our benefit, and to the benefit of the end user in the end, once we find a way to make things operate smoothly, to change over smoothly from one pattern to another. Certainly economically, we stand to gain from being a little less attached to the artifact and more attached to the evolution of an idea, the growth of a pattern, and where that should lead. In software, as in life, we're always trying to improve what we're doing and how we do it, or at least we hope to be. Mostly when that turns painful, it's because there's friction in the evolution. We have to do something different than we used to. We have to learn a new system. We have to adjust and change things from a way that worked perfectly fine for us in the past and we knew how to get along with, and it's painful to make that change and sometimes feels or is unnecessary, and it's reasonable to be aggrieved about it, but it doesn't have to be that way, and that does often stand in the way of progress overall, even when an instance is reasonable. It takes some guidance to do it right, and this is where the synthesis between man and machine applies. One area where there's been some recent growth is with e-ink notebooks. The way you can scribble in a notebook, you can scribble in an e-ink tablet and accomplish more or less the same thing, but now with the addition of processing of what you wrote and annotations and magic in the tablet that you wouldn't find in a notebook. But for now, you have in the physical notebook simplicity and flexibility that you still don't in the tablet. But the more we iterate, the better it'll get. And the idea of being able to scribble down notes with no overhead whatsoever. Grab the thing and scribble. Not to have to think about it, that's what counts as far as the interface goes. If we can preserve that and gain some of the technological side to be able to collate those notes, process those notes, all the better. That's just one example. But that's the kind of growth that can be perpetuated. It's continued across many generations of implementation, many versions of attempts to get things just right, and just right may differ, and that's the flexibility that we gain too. What's perfect for one user or one community or one organization is not the same as another, and now the barrier is lowered to make those modifications. And we can apply those kind of software changes when we look at the artifacts as enablers, when we have that capacity now. And we find that the human-centered approach to development isn't at all about restraining development or limiting how technology is used, but rather guiding it to its proper evolution, so that it becomes, for the most part, less visible even when it's more present, becomes smoother despite its greater complexity. The transience of a piece of software becomes what drives the permanence of an idea.